So I just wanted to kind of touch on a subject that for many years we were not allowed to speak about on YouTube, which were the COVID vaccines. Even saying the word vaccines on YouTube would have had you censored and with misinformation, etc., etc. It seems that Google has allowed us to have a voice again and to reflect on our lived experiences with these experimental vaccines, mRNA vaccines. And I just really wanted to comment on the Telegraph that ran a story a few days ago. It was on the 15th. Government withholding data that may link COVID jab to excess deaths. If you remember back to 2020, we had that very, very strange year in 2020 where our hospitals were practically empty. It seemed like sisters and doctors had very little to do. They were doing these very choreographed dances and so forth. Our hospitals were empty in Ireland. That's not anecdotal. That happened. We stopped testing for cancers. We stopped doing smear tests. We stopped doing routine checkups. You were told stay at home. And all of a sudden, guess what? Things, it was as if our cancer diagnosis rate plummeted in Ireland. But again, nurses and doctors, you know what I'm talking about back in 2020. The latter half of that year, it was where were the waiting lists, the trolley waiting lists? All of a sudden, trolley waiting lists disappeared in our healthcare system. Very bizarre moment in Irish history. But anyway, roll on 2021. So in 2020, you have roll on 2021, you have the change in president. In the United States, you have the slow rollout of these experimental mRNA vaccines. mRNA, for those who don't know, they introduce into you they get your cells to produce the spike protein of the virus so that your immune system reacts to this spike protein, and then you create an immunity, right? And not your ordinary vaccine, because this is kind of genetically modifying your body to produce a spike protein, which we normally don't do, right? But anyway, you couldn't talk about any of this. We couldn't have an open and honest exchange of ideas. No. Censorship. I did a few videos. They would take down my channel. Complete censorship. And we had our Pope at the time, the head of the Catholic Church, a meeting with Pfizer various times, setting up vaccination halls within the Vatican to give to people this experimental mRNA vaccines. You had the Pope firing his own employees. So our Holy Father, all this nonsense, oh yes, todos, complete nonsense when it came to the vaccine. No, todos for you, Swiss guards. You don't take this experimental vaccine, you're out the door. Ciao. Non todos. And this is the truth. It might seem very hard for me, but the church kind of needs to learn the lesson, because I am a bit angry about this. My wife is Polish and her mother was dying at the time. And so for her to travel to Poland, even though she didn't want this experimental vaccine, she was forced to take it in order to get the cert. Now, you could have done tests and all of this to get this, your travel cert, but she just decided to go with it. So she got the Moderna vaccine. And after the first dose, she got pretty sick. Her whole arm was bruised. We have photographs of that. She started losing her balance. Her hearing and her balance was off. And I know my wife. I know her like 21 years at the time, being married to her. And I said, Kinga, this isn't normal. You're not like this. And she was really shook. And then if you spoke about this on social media or put it on Facebook, it was taken down. You couldn't say, well, look, And then, so that was 2021. Because she got so sick, we decided not to. And then a cousin of mine who worked in Pfizer, they were telling us, don't take this vaccine. So like employees of Pfizer telling us, I won't tell you which cousin, but they were spreading it around saying, don't take that vaccine. There's loads of us in Pfizer are not taking it. We're not completely confident in it, etc., etc. But you couldn't say that in social media. You couldn't say that in a blog at the time because they would have taken it down. This really happened, guys, right? In the midst of all of that, I remember at the time, Kinga saying to me, well, don't take the vaccine because she was so sick. My brother in Belfast, he took the AstraZeneca dose, the first dose, and he got so sick for it, he wouldn't take any more of them. And this is not anecdotal. This is just our own family experience. So most of our family, I didn't take it. My sister-in-law didn't take it. My brother didn't take any more doses. My kids didn't take it. We were kind of on the same page that this stuff is rushed. Where's the data? Where's the science? Where's the long-term studies? And then you had the Pope saying, oh, it's a lack of charity for not taking this vaccine. Based on what data? Did it stop transmission? No. We all saw the Israeli experiment. Oh, it's super duper, it's fantastic. It's working, we're getting back to normal. And then, oh, hold on a second. Everybody's getting infected again. Oh, another dose. Oh, sorry, that doesn't last very long. We need another dose. And another dose. Like, where did it end up? The madness that humanity fell into in that period. Especially, and what's even more sad for us Catholics is the remote connection to abortion. The fact that these vaccines were tested on HEK cells from selectively aborted fetuses, which is true. There is a remote connection. So, on the one hand, the science is very, very, very fuzzy. And on the other hand, you have the implications. And let's not forget the billions of dollars that was made from these vaccines, right? So this was a whole industry, for-profit industry. Pfizer and Moderna and AstraZeneca, they weren't doing it for the good of their souls. It was for money. So, our hospitals are empty. Remember that strange year, 2021? No, wait, no nursing associations and doctors saying, our hospitals are crowded. We've 200, 400 people, 600 people on trolleys. No. There was no 600, 800 people. There was no crisis in our hospitals in 2020. Remember back, go back and check the figures. But then as we started to roll out the vaccine, then things started going strange. We started to have excess deaths. And you can look at this up. It's been well documented. So we have started, what happened that all of a sudden we became one of the most vaccinated countries in the world, 90 whatever something. And yet we have excess deaths. What's the cause of that? Are they dying of COVID? Are they dying of what? Delayed diagnosis in hospital of cancers that we didn't treat? It's interesting because, that crackpot Maria Divine Mercy, Mary Carberry, which I don't believe in. But she did say there's going to be a pandemic and they're going to have a forced vaccination program and don't take the vaccine. It's amazing how many Catholics in Ireland didn't do that because of that lady. It's the same lady that says, by the way, Pope Benedict is going away and the next guy that's going to come in, he's going to remove the co-redemptrix. Just be careful here. Like, there comes a stage and you wonder, like, how much of this prophecy this lady had. She called out the St. Gallen Mafia. She calls out that the Pope is going to resign. Well, he's going to, they wanted him to resign. There's going to be a new Pope. The new Pope's not going to be like the old Pope. The new Pope is going to be X, Y, and Z. He's going to do this, he's going to do that. And then, there's going to be a pandemic. They're going to try and vaccinate you. Be careful. Don't take it. Blah, 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 blah. And then when kids we started giving this to kids that, weren't dying of COVID. And all of a sudden they started getting pericarditis and myocarditis, which we also couldn't speak about. We couldn't say to the Holy Father, this vaccine that you're promoting is causing people to die. Now, let's say 1 million people extra. If you look at the excess deaths across the world in different countries, excess deaths during that period, say, I don't know, 100,000 excess deaths, 200,000, 50. Release the data. I'm just going to read you something here. The US Health Authority Agency argued that releasing data would lead to stress or anger. Yes, it will. Yes, it will. Oh, yes, it will. Of bereaved relatives if a link were to be discovered. Public health officials have argued that publishing the data risks damaging the well-being and mental health of families and friends of people who died. Not just people who died, people who also suffered the side effects of this experimental vaccine, that we didn't have a choice. When I went on the Camino, in order to go to Spain in the Camino in 2021, because I wasn't going to take the vaccine, and my son definitely wasn't going to take the vaccine, we had to get tested to get that kind of European travel cert to go to Spain. So I remember going in and getting tested in Ballina in a pharmacy and coming out and going in with my son to have a coffee in a coffee shop. And the guy said, no, you can't have a coffee unless you're vaccinated. I said, well, I'm not vaccinated, but I've just gone and got tested in the pharmacy. Here's my cert, here are my results. 5 minutes ago. Yeah, but the law says we can't serve you unless you're vaccinated. That was 2021, August 2021. Then you had the nonsense. My son wanted to go to the cinema. And in order to buy a cinema ticket, you needed to be vaccinated. And so I can't buy a cinema ticket for my son to go to the cinema because I'm not vaccinated, but I'm not going to the cinema. Yeah, but those are the laws. That's the guidelines. You can't buy a cinema ticket unless you're vaccinated. I don't know, where biblical scripture passage did it talk about something about a mark and not being able to buy and sell? I don't know. Maybe you'll find it somewhere there in the Bible. One of those biblical prophecies. But anyway, I don't want to drag you down the conspiracy route, but that was my lived experience. I remember turning around to my son in the cinema and I said, I'm sorry you're not going to the cinema because they are discriminating against us, but at least now you've witnessed a little bit about what discrimination actually means and the nonsense we were living in. But anyway, that was, they were reinventing and inventing legislation and laws like, it's just, and again, you couldn't speak about it. You couldn't go on YouTube or Facebook and do a rant and do a video. You weren't allowed. You weren't allowed to share information. But listen to this. Last year, a cross-party group expressed alarm about growing public and professional concerns over UK's rates of excess deaths since 2020. UK's rates of excess. Don't tell me there's excess deaths since 2020. Can't be. You sure we've had a vaccine? How could there be excess deaths? What could be causing that? Can't be the vaccine because that's 100% super duper ooper safe. No side effects. Don't come with conspiracy theories here on YouTube, Robert. It's been tested. Von der Leyen said it was fine, and who was it? Boris Johnson said it was fine, and the top health official said it was fine. So how could there be excess deaths? Anyway, a letter to the UK HSA and the Department of Health, the MPs and peers said that potentially critical data which map the date of people's COVID vaccine doses to the date of their deaths had been released to pharmaceutical companies, but not to the public domain. Oh, So our politicians have mapped the data when people got their dose of the vaccine and then when they died. Right, okay. Interesting data, no? It'd be nice to kind of understand that data. So when did they get the dose? When did they die? What did they die of? Were they dying of blood clots? Heart attacks? Because you had all of these mortuary people who were embalming people for funerals saying something strange here. When we're doing embalming, we're finding all of this stuff coming out of people's veins that we never saw before the vaccine program. Again, you couldn't speak about that because if you did that, it'd be conspiracy theories. Do you know what I mean? Conspiracy, Can't have sharing of data. Do you understand? We slipped ourselves into this totalitarian regime without us even noticing it. We're supposed to have free speech. It's laughable when you think about it. We're supposed to live in a free society with free exchange of ideas. But you couldn't talk about this. And our Pope, with his todos, firing his Swiss guards because they wouldn't take that vaccine, which seems to be linked now to excess deaths. Some of these Swiss guards had already had COVID and probably didn't want to take the vaccine. Or maybe they didn't want a treatment that had a remote link to abortion. The nonsense about a Pope of todos starts to crumble a little bit here. Yeah. I'll sit down with the poor and I'll sit down and have a meal with the transsexuals and the poor. But like when it comes to firing my Swiss guards because they won't take a vaccine, let's not talk about that. Because we couldn't talk about that. I am angry. Because we don't have the data. We were sold a lie. Unless we learn from this, are we going to do a similar program in years to come? What? 100,000, 200,000, 300,000? Excess deaths, 400,000? Look at the figures. What is causing this pattern of excess death that nobody wants to speak about? They have the data. They've released it to pharmaceutical companies. Why not release it to the public? Again, up to now, all of the different... For a while, it was you couldn't even talk about mRNA vaccine. That they were giving kids. There are some countries that have banned mRNA vaccine, like Japan. Why is that? They gave them separated 3 different vaccines instead of their group. But why is it unpopular? Why is it conspiracy theorists to kind of want to show us the data? Let's see the data. Just because Donald Trump is in the White House and Robert Kennedy is there, happens to be the nephew of a Democrat president, if I'm not mistaken. And all of a sudden, they advised against pregnant women taking ibuprofen in the States. Advil, ibuprofen, right? The hilarious thing is, Advil have had tweets and publications say, well, we don't recommend that women take this medication anyway. So the drug company itself, long before Robert Kennedy came on the scene, long before Donald Trump came on the scene, was telling pregnant women, we don't recommend because we don't have any studies on it. I mean, off-label doctors might advise, they might think, well, it could be fine, but like Advil itself, you can't go and sue them because, they said, well, we never said you could take it. I think I'm conspiracy here, but like, this data is important because the church needs to learn. Our bishops were asleep at the wheel, closing churches and seminarians that year in Ireland, Maynooth, dismal time. During that period, they were ordaining more bishops than priests in Ireland, but they were forcing seminarians to take this experimental vaccine. And one I remember said he wasn't going to bother entering seminary if that was the case. But anyway, look, 5 years ago I would have been labeled conspiracy theorist on my channel. They would have taken down my video. They would have reported. Now, when I quote the Telegraph, guys, a mainstream newspaper. Oh, it's gone. Now, you might get a little bit uncomfortable. Maybe the next Pope will step back when CEOs of vaccine companies say, come and look, Holy Father, we need to get you on board. You need to be the spokesman for the UN Department on Vaccines and promote these and get Catholics to take them. It doesn't matter that there may be excess deaths among Catholics, which there were. And nobody wants to speak the truth. You don't see massive levels of excess deaths in Africa during that same period, do you? Wonder why? Wonder what they would... we weren't giving them those experimental, expensive mRNA vaccines because we weren't. You know, poor countries can't pay billions for these things. So, Telegraph does a great job. Come on, release the data. Release the data to all doctors, all medical professionals, all scientists. The mainstream media is sowing the doubt here. Give us the data. In Ireland, give us the data on excess deaths. Why has there been excess deaths since 2020? There wasn't in 2021. No vaccine program. We had COVID, no vaccine program. So, no excess deaths in 2020. And then all of a sudden, what changed? What did we introduce? What happened? You know, while our politicians are now going off to their new jobs in the world, is banks and, you know, getting, you know, flying, the Leo Varadkar's resigning, and all our politicians, you know, all of these COVID politicians, they seem to be finding themselves new jobs. Well, give us the data. You know, you censored us for long enough. You wouldn't let us speak for long enough. The Irish mystic that the Diocese of Dublin said, no, she's not approved. She can't speak. She can't go reading her books, Book of Truth. She got it pretty right, didn't she, on the vaccine and on the pandemic that was coming? You know, but I think people have short memories because during the swine flu pandemic, that wasn't as bad, but they tried to introduce a vaccine back then, and then a good few kids got narcolepsy, you know, the sleeping disorder, which was proven to be directly linked to that vaccine. Now, it took a few years for science to catch up and for us to get the truth. But when you rush through a treatment, you should allow the population to make their own choices and to live with their own choices. Because the companies making these billions of dollars can't be sued, can't be held accountable. Our politicians can't be held accountable half the time unless you vote them out of office. So, you know, I'm just kind of reflecting on it. I'll post a link to the Telegraph. You know, they argued that the data should be released on the same anonymized basis that it was shared with pharmaceutical groups, and there seems to be no credible reason why it should not be done immediately. You know, Big Pharma can get the truth, but the ordinary Joe So is not allowed it. You bullied us, you censored us, you denied us basic human rights of travel, our basic freedoms. And you think that the population is just going to sit by quietly? Yeah, we've excess deaths. How many of us couldn't go to funerals? You know, the nonsense we had to live with. How many countries had none of these regulations like Sweden? They continued it on as normal. Never closed the church, said mass every day during the pandemic. happened to follow the mass that was said in Gothenburg because there's a chapel. I just out of curiosity to see, well, you're celebrating mass every day, and your people going to mass they're all not all falling over and dying. So what's the story here? Surely Sweden is going to be completely collapsing here because they haven't introduced a lockdown, they haven't closed everything up. You know, there's something very wrong with this. You know, the Pope of todos, has to take responsibility for what he pushed. And the lives and the people that refuse to take it, they need an apology. The Vatican should issue an official apology to those that they harassed to take this vaccine. It wasn't effective. It didn't stop transmission. We don't know if the benefits outweighed the risks. It certainly didn't with kids, causing pericarditis and myocarditis in a group of the population that weren't impacted with this virus, as were the elderly. You know, we've had seasons of bad flu and weak flus that happen every couple of decades. But all of a sudden, the world became bonkers and obsessed. And you were conspiracy theorist for taking this if you didn't want to take the vaccine. We're allowed to talk about it now. We need to leave our experiences on the record for those in future decades. Do you know what? I remember at the start of the pandemic, and this was on Amazon, they had a TV series about a fake virus that gets released so that a vaccine company can profit and make money from a vaccine. I kid you not, this series was on Amazon. It was just filmed and released before the pandemic, and I managed to watch it. Now, Amazon have took that down during the pandemic. It was too close to reality. You know, it wouldn't be the first time that Big Pharma makes a lot of money with faulty data. And just think about it, guys. We should have the ability to control what we put into our own bodies, and not have our basic human rights taken away because we don't want to put something into our own bodies. We've been listening to, 60 years? My body, my choice. My body, my choice. Take your rosaries off my ovaries and all that stuff, right? When it comes to this vaccine, your body, no choice, no travel, no job, no restaurant, no human freedoms. You take this. And the data, we're not releasing it. Excess deaths, we're not talking about them. Can't fool us again. Anyway, I'm leaving this on the record. I know it's a bit angry, but again, the truth has to be told, and the church needs to learn, because millions of people took these experimental vaccines based on the advice of the church. The church are not doctors. The Pope wasn't a doctor. Stick to preaching Christ and stop being the spokesperson for Big Pharma. God bless you. Take care. Bye-bye.